Welcome back, gentle listeners, to Talk to the Fist, which I guess is what we're calling this now. My sort of on again, off again interview series that will be on again now that I'm sort of like back in more stable environs. Today, I am joined by Ernst van Sale, who is the PR head of Afriforum, which is an organization in South Africa that is doing a lot of work for the minority Afrikaans community, given the I was going to say recent unpleasantness in South Africa, but the unpleasantness has been going on for quite a while. Quite a while. Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me. Yes, I'm tuning into this conversation from the literal heart of darkness time zone, Central Africa time. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I think this whole topic of parallels between South Africa and the Western world is going to remain relevant for quite some time. I'm not the first person to point this out, but I do think I'm the first person in this recent article of mine to try and conceptualize what these parallels actually are and what forms they take when your country is diagnosed with South Africanization. But we can get into that. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yes, I should actually just get that article up. How third worldism can destroy the West. It does really seem like it's going that way. If I may ask, I mean, to people that I know in the rest of the West, when you talk about South Africa, particularly with the recent migrations that were supported by the Trump administration, mainly in my opinion, as a way to get back at South Africa for supporting the ICC case against Israel, rather than sort of like any sort of actual racial solidarity. The general view seems to be very black-pilled. It's over, bro. But yet when I look on the Afriforum website, you guys seem to be doing a lot in local government and pushing back, working on infrastructure. Is it as over as people in the West seem to think?
Well, it's a common saying in political science classes that South Africa is not for beginners. So I think that's the lesson that you learn when you try to decipher what's going on here. There's a lot of complexities and nuances. It often is not as black and white or straightforward of a country to analyze. What you're describing there is pretty much the type of trap that a lot of people fall into. It goes either way. On the one side, they fall into the cognitive trap of, well, because there are Afrikaners leaving the country as refugees, it means there's no future for Afrikaners in South Africa. Things are so bad that it's impossible to build a future there. But the other trap that people fall into is when organizations like Afriforum say, well, we are choosing not to take that option. Doesn't mean that we reject the option's existence. We have not asked the Trump administration to take the option off the table, or that it is something that should not exist. But we as an organization were founded on the mission of ensuring a future for Afrikaners at the southern tip of Africa. So we're going to stick to that mission. But just because we are committed and remain committed to that mission doesn't mean that these issues that are often referenced regarding South Africa, the very bad things happening in South Africa, to quote Mr. Trump, that these things aren't happening. And I think it really is often comes down to it's a bit of a cliche at this point, but the idea of two things can be true at the same time. So neither the worst case scenario or the best case scenario is actually the situation in South Africa. The bad things are happening here, but they are also not insurmountable.
One of the things that I really noticed when I was perusing the Afriforum site is that the Afrikaans community has leaned fully into the language of minority rights. I believe you actually have a delegation going to the UN to argue this exact point, which is something that whites in the West are sort of increasingly coming to terms with. Maybe not, I mean, to take the UK as an example, although the overall country is still majority white, there have been sort of incredible demographic changes, mainly in the large cities, that have rendered the sort of white population very, very much a minority, whilst at the same time, those populations are still being harangued with the language of minority rights that are essentially being applied to the majority. At what point did this shift happen to the Afrikaans? My South African history is not great, so maybe if you could give us like a little sort of summary of what has happened to the Afrikaans community over, like, say, the last 20 years. We've heard about the awful things that have been happening. I mean, this is what tends to make the news: the farm murders, and that kind of like stuff. But in terms of the legal architecture of now that the Afrikaans are a minority community and can appeal to international organizations for protection under these minority clauses that were clearly never designed to benefit whites. I mean, the way I read them anyway. How did that come about?
So, I mean, it's a fascinating chapter in history. I mean, someone needs to write a book on it. People are bullying me to write the book on it, but I'll get to it if I have the time. But to sum up, I'll avoid rambling for an hour because there's really so much fascinating stuff that's happened just in the past 30 to 20 years in South Africa. But the cliff notes, or the elevator pitch of it all, is the fact that in 1994, the predominantly Afrikaner controlled state comes to an end. So apartheid, while technically a white dominated system, if you want to call it that, has a very strong apartheid. It has a very strong Afrikaner character to it. So the whole start of the system in 1948 was based around the National Party, which is an undeniably Afrikaner centered nationalistic party. So in 1994, this all ends. The Afrikaners, for that period of about 50 years or so, had plugged in all of their institutions, all of their hopes and dreams. Everything, their entire future was plugged into the state, because we control the state now, and we are putting our destiny in the hands of this massive state machine, and let's plug in all of our community-based non-governmental organizations and schools and institutions into the state as well to supercharge it. That was the logic. But then in 1994, that all comes to an end. And when you lose control over the state, you also lose all of those non-state organizations you short-sightedly plugged into the state machine as well. So in 1994, Afrikaners are literally left with, we have to start from scratch once again. We have no institutions. We have no organizations. We bet everything. We went all in on the state being the vehicle for preserving our culture and our people and building a future. And now that bet didn't pay off. So that's the lead up to 1994. So then what happens? Well, now we've got two options. You can either try to just put all your hope now in party politics, but as a 5% minority, that really is a very, very perilous path to put a very perilous basket to put all your eggs into. So the Afrikaners get disillusioned with party politics very fast, like within one or two elections, maybe a little bit more. And then we get to a point where now, if party politics cannot be used as an effective vehicle to protect your rights as a minority group, to preserve your culture and your language, and to ensure a future for your culture, then what vehicle is there? So then the Solidarity Movement is founded around 1997. But the Solidarity Movement is founded as a proactive step. So Afrikaners at the time were not disillusioned with party politics in mass as they are now, but the leaders and the founders of the Solidarity Movement, which Afriforum forms part of, had the foresight to see that this new high is going to come with this new Rainbow Nation high is going to come with one massive hangover, and it's not going to be within 5 or 6 generations. It's going to be quite soon, because the writing was already on the wall. The cracks were already showing. But so what happens then in the 2000s is the fact that, well, Afrikaners increasingly become disillusioned with party politics, but they also still have a strong sense of identity. There was an attempt to make Afrikaner identity so taboo that Afrikaners abandon it in mass. And the attempt, there was a lot of resources and time put into that project, but it didn't work. So Afrikaner identity was then over the years very thoroughly rehabilitated, where it lost its taboo. To the point where we got to now, where in the 2010s and then even more in the 2020s, Afrikaners just moved away from this state-centric view of the only mechanism or only pathway towards a sustainable or a safe future for our descendants is through winning elections and getting control over increasing amount of control over the state. That idea was just jettisoned, to the point where Afrikaners still go and vote, because party politics still has a massive effect in South Africa. And because minority groups in South Africa, such as the Afrikaners, go out to vote in massively disproportionate numbers to the black majority, if you were to compare the two, minority vote still has a massive effect on party politics in South Africa. So Afrikaners still go vote, but they've broadened their horizons to now also investing a lot of time and effort into community-based organizations such as Afriforum, which was founded in 2006. So you see this fascinating double case study play out in the 21st century in South Africa. On the one side, you have a absolutely perfect case study of what happens when chronic state decay takes root in a nation, where state capacity just chronically decays and there's no turnaround. It just becomes weaker and weaker. And the second dual case study that also emerges from South Africa that makes it a fascinating country to keep an eye on is, where does order come from when state capacity decays in the way that it does and a power vacuum is created? And that's part of the space where Afriforum that Afriforum is filling, is that vacuum of state capacity decay, where you now need a community-based answer to solving the problems that the government very clearly can't solve. And you're not going to be able to just change voting habits and then everything is fine. The ANC has been in charge of South Africa for the past 30 years. And even now, after their catastrophic 2024 election, where they technically, on a political science, from a political science angle, are technically in a coalition government, they're still getting every single policy that they want pushed through. So de jure, they're in a coalition government, but de facto, they are still the one party ruling South Africa. So that's the very, very, very almost recklessly compressed version of the past 30 years.
Can I just ask you about the way the rise of Mandela and the ANC was framed in South Africa? Obviously, in the West, the way sort of the removal of power from the white populations is always framed as the majority oppressing the minority. But in South Africa, since the Afrikaans were always a minority, I believe it was framed in the terms of the injustice of minority government. Is that correct?
Yes, so apartheid was very clearly framed in the sense of an oppressive minority-led government, race-based government, oppressing a specific ethnic majority, or rather racial majority. Seeing as it's a small nuance, but it does factor in quite a lot into the bigger picture. South Africa does not have a majority ethnic group. There's a majority racial group, but that black racial group in South Africa is so divided in regards to ethnic lines, cultural lines, linguistic lines, that you should not be interpreting it as a monolithic force or a monolithic group. And the same goes for the white population. I mean, the Afrikaners are the majority within the minority. There's about 4.5 million white South Africans, out of which 2.7 million are Afrikaners. And the rest are Anglos, Portuguese, Greeks, and the like. So that all, and these different white groups in South Africa, their voting habits and their ideology differ radically. So it's not just these guys speak a little bit of a different accent, or maybe even just speak a different language. No, the Anglos in South Africa are like wildly disproportionately more individualistic and liberal, while the Afrikaners are a lot more collectivist and conservative. Doesn't mean that there's not some strong overlaps between the two groups as well. And the the animosities of the 20th century have very strongly faded in the 21st century. I think also specifically because there's now a massive shared threat to both these groups, meaning that if you're up against the government that genuinely wants to just marginalize your children based on their skin color, and the government officials that turn a blind eye to incitement of violence against your group, and even members of parliament actively inciting violence against your group, I think the hatchet of the 21st century and the Anglo-Boer War and the like is very easily buried. But the ideological differences still very much persist. For example, there's a reason why Afrikaners have the Solidarity Movement and Afriforum, while English South Africans have think tanks and basically civic organizations without a cultural identity that roots them. It comes down to a very important difference between the two, where amongst Anglo-South Africans, to collectively organize around your identity is one of the worst sins you can commit. And I'm speaking generally, I know people are going to say, well, I'm an Anglo-white South African and I don't think that way. Well, the general trend is that, and amongst Afrikaners, the trend is organizing collectively around your culture, your heritage, your language is not taboo at all.
That's really interesting. Do you think that's because of differences in the rootstock, the Dutch versus the English, or do you think it's about the history of like Dutch colonization?
I think there's many factors, but if I had to point to one central factor, I think it's the fact that Afrikaners achieved ethnogenesis in South Africa, while South African Anglos have always been tied to a larger Anglosphere. They've never been just, we are one unique community, a unique culture, a unique ethnicity that was created in South Africa, whereas that is the Afrikaner experience of becoming something new, a unique ethnicity in South Africa with no other home, or we are not a satellite of some colonial headquarters somewhere else. Whereas you'll see the entire Anglosphere, whether it be Australia, New Zealand, the Anglos in South Africa and the like, have always seen themselves more as a satellite community of something bigger. Therefore, it's much easier for them to indulge in hyper individualism than the Afrikaners, who, if you indulge in hyper individualism, that's the end of your entire culture.
That's very, very interesting. Was the language of minority employed due to the sort of fractured tribal nature of the black population of South Africa? I have since come to the conclusion, as many have, that much of the political language around minority is really just highly weaponized, and quite honestly always has been, because you can see very, very clearly that what constitutes a minority is really not about numbers at all. It is, sort of generally speaking, slanted, like very anti-white, language of colonialism, all this kind of like other stuff that everyone's been putting up with for decades now. You mentioned that there was a real effort to stamp down Afrikaans identity. Was there any discussion of this interfering with minority rights? Are there tribes in black tribes in South Africa, tribal groupings that also use this language of minority in order to get political cachet? Like how does, or has it just been all leveled in this sort of idea of sort of racial communist justice?
So I think here's where a massive political culture difference comes in between South Africa and, for example, countries like the United States, where when you talk about a minority in the South African political context, whether it's left-wingers or conservatives or anyone across the political spectrum using that term, it's very cold and clinical and technical when it's being used. It literally is, you are numerically not the majority. So we talk easily about linguistic minorities, racial minorities, cultural minorities, ethnic minorities, and the like. And there's no contestation of, no, this is actually a lot more of a subjective term that can only apply to these groups. In the South African political context, it's almost like it's fixated on just the numbers game, and it's always been like that. The question of how this type of framing affects other minority groups in South Africa. Well, the clear thing here to understand here is that the South African government, the ANC-led South African government, is pretty much a culture shredder. It's not a it's almost like a globalist government in microcosm, where they from the beginning, their mission has been to homogenize South Africa culturally, linguistically, religiously. That they are pretty much, their anthem is Imagine, but on a South African scale, where they, for example, in 1994, when the ANC took over the government, they had two options for when it came to the education system in South Africa. So South Africa has 11 official languages, each one of these languages very clearly corresponding to an ethnic group. So the Xhosas speak isiXhosa, the Zulus speak isiZulu, the Afrikaners speak Afrikaans, the Colored speak Afrikaans. And the like. Every one of these linguistic communities overlaps. The Venn diagram is almost one diagram with the culture and the language. But instead of developing these other languages in South Africa into languages that can be used for education from grade 1 to grade 12 and tertiary education, the ANC just took the Anglicization path of everything has to be English now. No development of other languages, no celebration of different cultures. We are going to just focus on the quote unquote South African culture, and everything's going to be English and secular. It really is not a government or a regime that is very, that has any sentimental value to cultural difference or linguistic difference. All cultural difference, linguistic difference, religious difference, all of this is just seen as obstacles to their goal. So it really is, that term that Samuel Huntington came up with, the Davos man. Well, the South African government, it might not look like it, but the South African government is the Davos government with Pan-African characteristics. It is a really strange case study, but it is globalist in its fiber. Like it might talk a little bit of a cultural game when it comes to, we want to preserve different cultural communities, and we don't want everything to be homogenized, but all of their policies point to homogenization on a national scale and standardization on a national scale. Everything has to become standardized and homogenized to one unified whole, which ironically, it's almost like a Greek tragedy where in your pursuit to try and wipe out all points of friction, you create a hellish level of friction.
It's the Procrustean bed, essentially. You know that story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. That's essentially the polar opposite of what they're doing in the UK, where every religion, every culture, every language must be celebrated, even deified, compared to that of the native population. I always sort of saw this as a just sort of natural through road to dispossessing the native population. I wonder if once the UK gets whatever, I can't even honestly figure out exactly what it is that the UK wants. It might be that at its root, your observation about how the English, even in South Africa, are still hyper individualist and making their think tanks, they will be just ultimately destroyed by groups that take a sort of serious go. You back?
Yes, my third world internet just had a hiccup.
That's all right. I just wonder if the individualistic English will just be sort of wiped away by groups that are very, very strong ethnic interest and ethnic networks. We're seeing this quite clearly in in the UK generally, but especially in places like London, where they're just being dominated by these tightly knit ethnic groups that are essentially taking over all of the functions, particularly of local government. And the English seem to be basically sort of powerless in the face of it, because as you said, because from the white English point of view, cleaving to your ethnicity in any way is seen as the worst thing that can happen. It's as though they just have no answer to people who do use ethnic self-interest. It's a very, very strange character to have.
It's like going into the world without an immune system.
Yes,
and that's what the case study in South Africa is proving as well, that the groups that are organizing around their identity and around a healthy self-respect are the ones that are achieving actual results, while the ones that are focused on just individualism and the individual and not something greater are spinning their wheels.
Well, this is why I wanted to ask you about your mission to the United Nations, because the Afrikaans are an ethnic group, but they're white. And, you know, the unwritten law is that the only kind of ethnic grouping that is respected is non-whites, which is why, for example, you find all of these international laws about indigenous ethnicity and stuff like that, and none of them ever apply to white indigenous populations. Have you had difficulties even sort of putting forward the idea of minority status at the UN? Have you had people say like, oh no, you can't be a minority, you guys are white, or sort of variations of that argument?
Our experience with at the UN, specifically the UN Minority Rights Forum, has been very positive over the past few years. I mean, I've been I've been the representative from Afriforum to do our presentation there 2 times now, and my experience there has been that if you bring enough undeniable facts that you can back up with the source where these facts are coming from, you can achieve quite a lot. Because at the end of the day, your goal is not to convince the UN to now take some supranational action to call the South African government to order. The main goal with that type of participation at such a forum is to simply prove that these issues that you are discussing are legitimate and real. And that has had a massive positive effect on our international lobbying, where we've been able to talk about the scourge of farm murders in front of the UN now multiple times, which adds a lot of legitimacy to furthering that cause internationally. It has opened a lot of doors for us. The fact that we've been able to take part in many of these forums to put the facts on the table regarding the South African government's race-based policies have had a massive effect as well in putting pressure on the South African government. Because the ANC has this, they've got a lot of flaws, but they've got this fascinating idea of the balance of forces, which is absolutely true, where they are fixated and obsessed with this strategy of the balance of forces, where if there's too many forces, if you do an assessment and there's too much forces pushing back, you don't move forward. You wait until the opportunity becomes better. If there's not enough resistance or headwind coming from forward, you can move forward. So Afriforum has to create as much resistance as possible to offset the balance of forces. And through taking part in these international forums, you create a lot of force on your side to add pressure on the government to not move forward with a lot of their policies, because the pressure is real. You're adding, you're shining a bright light on what they're doing. So an example of that is we've submitted reports to CERD, which is the Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, a UN body. Now, a lot of people I know, especially conservatives, will look at that and say, well, what's the point? I mean, they're not going to accept it. Well, they actually do. They accept these reports. And when South Africa was reviewed, the country gets reviewed every few years. About 2 years ago, South Africa's turn was to be reviewed. And I was at that behind closed doors meeting at the UN where South Africa was being reviewed, because we submitted a report documenting their racially discriminatory policies. And the South African government was actually put in a very difficult position where they had to explain these policies to the UN, because the UN, one of the UN representatives was literally sitting there with the report that I helped write in their hand, asking them questions about things like farm murders and race-based laws in South Africa. So all these things add up to adding pressure on the government. They're not going to lead to revolutionary change. They're not going to lead to, as I said, the UN now taking like action against the South African government, but it keeps shining a light on them. It keeps putting them in a more difficult, under pressure situation, that they see that the balance of forces is not on their side. And from Afriforum's perspective, I can testify that our participation at these forums have been a lot more positive in the outcomes that we've achieved through it, rather than not having an effect at all. I mean, if it didn't have an effect, we wouldn't be spending any money on actually participating.
I mean, that's quite fascinating because, of course, the UN has had a big role in the evolution of South Africa, the campaign against apartheid, and all of that, the sort of international opprobrium that was heaped on South Africa. It must, I guess, be very, very bad optics for the ANC to then turn around and introduce a sort of reverse apartheid. I mean, I realize it's not quite as systemic, but there are a lot of race-based laws.
South Africa has 145 race-based laws on the books.
Dude, that's a lot.
there's literally a graph that shows you how many race-based laws have been put on the books in South Africa from 1910, when the country was founded, to now. You can find it at www.racelaw.co.za. And it really puts things into perspective. But I just wanted to add there as well, the other thing that's also important to consider when it comes to this topic of using all of the options at your disposal. I think sometimes people on the right are too quick to just write off many avenues of adding pressure as, well, this terrain is obviously lost, or this battlefield is obviously not going to be very conducive to our mission. Let's just not take part in it at all. But what Afriforum has found is that you try literally everything. You try all of the avenues to add pressure on your on your government to change, and a lot of it has pleasantly surprised us with the results that we found. So, for example, I mean, it's very easy to say, well, what's the point of trying anything with the UN? That's obviously not going to work. Well, we've had major successes in regards to adding pressure on the government and actually putting them in a very tough situation where we've ensured that the issue of, for example, farm murders was debated in front of the UN, a UN committee for the first time in history, which adds a lot of legitimacy to activism around that issue and raising awareness around that issue. So when it comes to Afriforum's approach here, it really is an approach of, let's see what all the different avenues are out there that are at our disposal, and let's try as many of them that are practically possible. And so far, that's had a very, very positive return on investment, even from very unorthodox places that we've tried. Because my last point on this would be the fact that I think sometimes people fall into the trap of looking at an organization like the UN and thinking it's just 5 people sitting around a table in a room deciding what the mission of the organization is or what they're going to do. But it's an organization of thousands of people, and they are not all on the same page. And you can, if you talk to the right people and you get connected to the right people within that superstructure, you can actually get quite a lot done and have a lot of doors open for you that are quite unexpected.
Yeah, there is a lot of passivity and demoralization on the right. I think it might be this sort of interregnum period where many people in the West, deep down, they realize that they are going to have to sort of pick up the mantle of ethnicity, and they are going to have to at some point do this, but they can't quite bring themselves to grasp the nettle. There's been so much conditioning, particularly since the end of World War II. But if you are correct, then this might even be a sort of deeper, maybe almost genetic characteristic of the Anglos, or the fact that they're still holding on to a previous ethnogenesis that is sort of fading, and there's no I guess it's hard to make a new ethnogenesis. It takes a long time. If I could ask you
Sure.
for the second half about your article, that, hang on, I'm just going to share this now. This is how you actually sent me this over Twitter. Thank you very, very much for that. You had some comments to say about the parallels between the decay of South Africa and what was currently happening in other parts of the West, particularly the UK. Would you like to expound on that a little? I think
Sure.
I think it's a very interesting topic.
Yeah. So the premise of the article is that Westerners are realizing their countries are becoming more like South Africa, not less, by the year, and that's South Africanization. But then you also hear many politicians that actively say, like the quiet part out loud, that no, well, South Africa is the blueprint. South Africa is the model. I mean, that's what New York Mayor Zoran Mandami literally said earlier this year in his inaugural speech. He said that the African National Congress, the ANC's Freedom Charter, is a key inspiration for him, and that's why he's the thumbnail.
What do you think he means by that precisely? What is the ANC Freedom Charter exactly?
So the ANC's Freedom Charter is pretty much just their ideological foundation, but it has a lot of things that it has a lot of components that you only really understand when you read it in conjunction with their other founding documents and other documents that they that are core to their canon, if I can call it that. So another document that I reference in this piece is the National Democratic Revolution, which pretty much states that this is the recipe for how you turn a country from a conservative government into a liberal government, into a socialist government, into a communist government. And the ANC, you don't even have to speculate. It's not like going to the dark web and finding proof of all this. They literally make announcements. So I remember about 15 years ago, about between 15 and 16 years ago, the ANC came out and announced the first phase of the National Democratic Revolution is now ended. We are now entering the second phase, or officially announcing entering the second phase. What it means, again, fascinating document, but to sum it up, the first phase of the National Democratic Revolution is you pretend to be just your classic garden variety liberal party. You believe in free markets, individual rights, the freedom of speech, freedom of association, just to gain power. Then after you've gained power through this facade, you can start, you then go into phase two. Phase two of the National Democratic Revolution is you start centralizing more power in the hands of the state, start limiting a lot of these individual rights, especially freedom of association, freedom of speech, private property rights, and you become more socialist and you start spending a lot more. You create what the ANC have pretty much done for the past 30 years, and that is to create a welfare industrial complex where more than 50% of the population is dependent on some form of government grant. And it's not a bug, it's a feature. They celebrate it as a feature. Every year they celebrate, oh, well, we've added 500,000 more people to social grants this year. A fantastic achievement for the South African government. Because that's the goal. Because
it's like Cloward Piven, the country, if you know about the Cloward Piven plan.
No, I'm not familiar.
So Cloward Piven strategy was invented supposedly by this Jewish woman, American woman, Frances Fox Piven. And her aim was to essentially force universal basic income by overloading the welfare system of American states to the point of collapse. It was a big thing in the 60s New Left to essentially force mass welfareization on people in the name of social justice, quote unquote. Man, that's really interesting.
But it's political dynamite, because what it does is once you reach a critical mass of people dependent on the government for state grants, the ruling party can just tell those people when elections roll around, I can turn off this tap at any moment. So you better ensure that I stay in charge. Otherwise, the next guy is going to turn off this tap. And the welfare tap in South Africa for millions of South Africans, if that were to be turned off, it literally is a question of life and death. It's not like people just living an easy life on the dole. So when it comes to this model, this welfare industrial complex, it gives you a quite iron grip on power. It's very ingenious. It works. It has worked in South Africa for the past 30 years, giving the ANC a unprecedented hold on power. But then, of course, there's the third phase of the National Democratic Revolution, and that is when you have achieved full socialism. That's when you transition to communism, meaning that even more power is centralized to the final point where you reach the total state point, as our friend Oren has written about. And currently in South Africa, we are officially still in stage 2. It was announced, as I said, a few years ago, and we've not had an announcement that we are now transitioning to stage 3. But everything I've described here is not like some speculation or conspiracy theory. You can read these documents on the ANC website as you can read the Wikipedia page of McDonald's. It's that transparent. It's that public.
So how do they envision the third stage? The erasure of private property, presumably?
Yeah.
How is this?
That's a key ingredient. The fact that all property then becomes centralized in the hands of the state, and the citizens of that country lease the property on 99-year leases from the government.
How is such a vast welfare state funded in South Africa? Is there even enough of a productive economy to fund such a behemoth?
By a very, very small tax base. And this is where unfortunately a little bit of a depressing point comes in for a lot of Western countries. You think this collapse happens fast. Your descent is going to be very, very slow. Collapse is much less like a bomb going off and a lot more like those slow motion crash test dummy vehicle videos of a vehicle crashing. There's still a lot of far way to fall. South Africa, when the ANC took over, was not sitting on a massive heap of money. I don't even want to know how long collapse is going to take for a country like the United States that's sitting on a massive mountain of money, even though a lot of it is debt. It's just it's incomparable. But South Africa's collapse has been an ultra slow motion car crash where there's a lot of money to burn, and you can burn trillions every year on absolute nonsense, and your country still remains relatively functional. And I'm emphasis on relatively. The South African government had rolling blackouts for 18 years, and they didn't result in the ruling party losing an election. I was a small child on my way to primary school when I heard over the radio for the first time we're going to experience rolling blackouts for the first time. And now I'm married, I have a mortgage, and I have a child on the way. And the rolling blackouts happened just the other day.
So what you're saying is that there is essentially a plateau of enshittification, and that, you could probably make the point that from the point of view of the ruling elite, this is sort of a feature, not a bug, really. It just fosters more and more.
For the longest time, it is an excruciatingly slow descent. It's last year 2 graves were vandalized in the local cemetery. This year 3 were vandalized. Last year a pipe burst in the street and the municipality took a month to come fix it. This year they took 2 months to fix it. That's collapse, and even that's already a little bit too fast of a summary on my part. It's a very, very slow process. So that's also where a lot of this flawed thinking comes in of, I'm just going to wait for this collapse. It's going to be this apocalyptic moment, almost like the accelerationist eschatology. And then where my faction's going to take over and use the opportunity to fill the void. Well, you're not going to be alive. It probably is going to get to that point where there's like a final collapse. There's nothing left. The path to that final collapse or moment is potentially so long and excruciating, and there's no way you can't accelerate it. There's no way you can really have an influence on it. The only thing you can do is to work on solutions proactively so that you're not completely left exposed to the elements when things get really bad. And that's what Afriforum has been doing. I mean, Afriforum turns 20 years old this year. It's an organization that was founded proactively 20 years ago when the South African government was in a lot better place than it is today. 2006 looks like a fantastic place to be compared to where the state of the South African government in 2026. But the point being that you don't wait until the storm hits and then everyone magically wakes up and then people get down to business and start building. No, you need to be proactively establishing your network and your team now. When the storm hits, you're going to be surrounded by panicked people and you're not going to be able to build anything. You start working towards your solution before the majority of people can see the writing on the wall. But that's a topic for another day. I mean, I can go into the fact that this whole myth of the we just wait for the masses to wake up and then everything's going to be fine. That's not how it works. Well, at least from our perspective here in South Africa, that's not how it works. The masses, the majority of people are, humans in general are absolute experts at just insulating and then normalizing the decay and insulating themselves from it. And that's what happens. The masses don't wake up. There's no great awakening moment. It's people just insulate themselves from the decay and they normalize it. I mean, that's how we had 18 years of rolling blackouts.
I think a lot of the West is still, quite frankly, inhabiting the early 20th century in this regard. Like, they believe, they look at what happened in sort of the early and mid 20th century and believe that, some apocalyptic war will come or some great uprising, whereas what you describe as sort of like the long march of enshittification is actually much more likely, and until I guess you get to some sort of critical point of collapse. But who knows when that might be. I think you're right. And it's interesting to see that. I mean, you guys Afriforum seems to have done like quite well. Obviously, people have heard of Orania. I don't know if you guys are associated with that.
We've got a very positive and good relationship with Orania. I also visit there regularly. I actually did an interview just this afternoon on Radio Orania about, coincidentally, this topic, where I made the point, quite a little bit abstract point of, I can't wait to see what the 21st century is like, because we're clearly still living in the death throes of the 20th.
Yes, well, exactly. But and not just that, but mentally, the entire West, actually not just even the West, actually, like the Russians as well, are still living in the 20th century. It's very strange. Like the fundamental questions, I guess, of the 20th century about, nationalism and identity were never really solved. And the sort of post-war solution was just, well, we just don't talk about that anymore, right?
It's like that Gramsci quote of the old world is dying, but the new one is struggling to be born.
Yeah. And now, I think this is why we're getting a lot of stuff. I mean, you can see America undergoing its own sort of mental convulsions in this regard, as the founding myths of the old world continue to fall away. They continue to shed, and no one has any idea of what's going to replace it. But everyone, all the defenders of the old order are unanimous in their opinion that whatever replaces this order has to be like terrible, and again, it has to be World War II. I really it's very strange. I wonder when, if ever, there will be some kind of new conception. I mean, I guess if it does go back to nationalism, you're going to have the same, some of the same problems that bedeviled Europe in the 20th century, right? Like, how do you define a nation? Inter-nation warfare. But conversely, the idea of globalism, of flattening everyone into a sort of homogenous paste, does not seem to have worked either. It's almost as though the more flattening occurs, the more the minor differences start to matter, because people still need to define themselves. They still need to define their groups. I noticed that. Hang on, just let me stick the Freedom Charter back up. I noticed this bit, which is kind of hilarious. From the Freedom Charter, all national groups shall have equal rights. That doesn't seem to have been what happened on the ground. I hope you're not telling me that what is professed in a political document versus the outcome is somehow diverged. I would.
It's funny because they say all apartheid laws and practices shall be set aside, but they literally just copy and pasted the racial categories that the apartheid system used. So when I now, for example, am in a car crash and I go to the police station to report it, the first question they ask me on the form is state your racial group. And I have to tell them whether I'm black, white, colored, or Indian.
That's crazy. Are these groups very rigidly patrolled? Like, is it haram to?
It's this weird, it's this absolutely bizarre situation. Well, I mean, it does make sense when you start thinking about it for other reasons, but it's just as under apartheid in modern day South Africa, there are no legal definitions for these racial groups. But if I were to wrongly classify myself, I can be prosecuted for fraud.
So there's no, it's like, it's yet another one of those things where it's not defined, but everybody knows what it is. And and if you take the piss, we'll come down on you very, very hard.
Right. So for example, with South Africa, with these strict racial quotas and race-based criteria for jobs and promotions, if I were to apply for a job and wrongly classify myself as black on the application form, I would be committing fraud.
That's amazing.
But black does not have a legal definition.
Right, but because, I don't know, presumably to give everybody a DNA test and start apportioning the amount of black or white you are would be seen as a bit fashy, as opposed to the current situation of kind of coercive ambiguity.
The irony is, even in its full absurdity, the apartheid regime came closer to a test than the South African government had. So they called it the pencil test, where they put a pencil in your hair, and if it fell out, then you were black, you were white, and if it stuck, you were black. But that's a real thing. But absurdly, that is closer to a standard than the South African government of today applies.
That's amazing. Was there a big demand for hair care products to attempt to get around that test?
You can literally Google the pencil test. I'm not joking.
Oh man, that's hilarious. So I guess if you want to expound more on sort of setting up a parallel structures, I mean, I know people have been talking about this a lot, and there is some movement towards that in the UK, although it's sort of it's kind of, in the UK, it's one of those things that's sort of, again, soft illegal. Like there's no specific law that condemns making like a charity or group that benefits whites, but it is functionally illegal by the precedent of being only a horrible person would do that, kind of the way it's sort of like structured. They seem to be having more success in America due to the strong focus on property rights. I mean, are Afrikaners in South Africa actually properly recognized as a minority, or is it still one of those things where they don't really sort of like want to acknowledge you as a group because that leads to other considerations that they'd rather not talk about?
No, Afrikaners have been officially recognized as one of the ethnic groups of South Africa by even the national census and by high-level politicians as well, referring to the Afrikaners as a distinct group. What also went a long way most recently was the Donald Trump in his executive order talking about the Afrikaners. We went and did research. It was the first time in history where a United States president has referenced the Afrikaners in a positive light, or in a non-negative light, as a distinct cultural group and ethnicity in South Africa, which goes a long way. It's very abstract. It's not, you can't really measure the effect of it, but it will have a massive effect. Just that acknowledgement once again of the Afrikaners as a unique group. But I mean, that's where a lot of what Afriforum does comes in. We're unashamedly a organization that speaks Afrikaans, a Christian organization with a focus on Afrikaners, but also not exclusively. We do a lot of work that benefits more people than just Afrikaners. I mean, next week, I'm going to be in court for a massive court case where we are fighting the Expropriation Act, where the South African government wants the power to expropriate anyone's property for nothing, expropriation without compensation. And Afriforum is fighting that in court. We're going to court next week for it. And if we win in that court case, that benefits everyone. That's not an Afrikaner exclusive mission or campaign of ours. So a lot of the things we do is to the benefit of all, but then also we have our branch system. So just to quickly maybe summarize our model. So Afriforum is a membership-based organization where you become a member by donating an amount of money every month. It's not like a membership basis where if you like a Facebook page, you become a member. You have to be a donating member. So we have 300,000 donating members at Afriforum in 2026. And then those resources we get from those donating members, we use to fund all our different projects and the people working at Afriforum, and also our court cases and our many reports and our international liaison tours, and also our many different branches. We've got over 177 branches all across the country. And those branches bring the Afriforum members in that community together. They identify the problems caused by state decay that is affecting their community most acutely, and then they formulate a solution to those problems. For example, our neighborhood watch network. So South Africa has a massive crime problem, but we've got over 175 neighborhood watchers all across the country, and they patrol their communities and keep their community safe and catch the bad guys. And it's not like this is your grandmother's neighborhood watch just with a flashlight and pepper spray. A lot of these guys are well armed and well trained. They're not a militia group in the extent that they are judge, jury, and executioner. Everything they do is within the confines of the law, but they are having major successes in their communities. I mean, one of our neighborhood watchers just the other day rescued 2 kidnapping victims in less than 2 hours.
Wow. So as the security provision of the centralized state has receded, you've had to build sort of ground up organizations.
Yes. So as the state lost its monopoly on legal violence, 3 other factions filled the void. So 2 good guy factions and 1 bad guy faction. So the private sector and community-based organizations, the 2 good guy factions, and then organized crime, the bad guy faction. And that's the other lesson from South Africa is then when a government decays and its capacity decays and a vacuum is created, that vacuum can only really be filled by one of 2 options, the good guys or the bad guys. And that's why South Africa has one of the largest and most competitive private security sectors and industries in the world. So there are more private security personnel in South Africa today than the military and the police combined by a factor of 4.
But you have gun rights in South Africa, yes?
Yes, but we have some of the strictest gun regulations in the world. So it's not like the UK where you're not allowed to have a gun in most cases. You can have a weapon for self-defense, but the process to get one is incredibly rigorous and long.
Right. So I guess I just want to finish off with some words about Malema.
Sure.
That's one of the things that a lot of people sort of saw when Trump was talking about Julius. It's Julius Malema, right?
Yes.
And his rather horrific habit of singing this very folksy traditional song, allegedly. I believe it's called "Shoot the Boer." Is that correct?
Yes, it's called Kill the Boer.
Kill the Boer.
Kichima, Chipran Konto, Alliance, shoot to kill, Yamaza, kill the poor, the farmer, kill the poor, the farmer, brr, pa, pa, brr, pa, pa.
Delightful.
So, for perspective for your UK audience, that's like Manchester United's football stadium being filled by people chanting about murdering a particular ethnic group in the most brutal way possible.
Dude, I believe you are actually, Afriforum is actually suing Malema according to this page. Could you give us a bit of background on that?
So at the moment, our main court case is regarding a firearms charge against him, where he was on stage and he shot a firearm in the air while he was chanting, and we laid criminal charges against him, and he was found guilty last year. He's now taking it on appeal, so he's not in prison yet. That's just how the South African legal system works. It has very slow turning gears, but we were able to ensure that he gets a criminal conviction and that he's probably going to prison for a long time if he fails in his appeals. But our court case regarding the Kill the Boer chant was not successful. That was a few years ago, about 4 years ago, where the High Court in South Africa ruled that it is not hate speech, that it is not incitement to violence. But the court case that's spoken about here, about ensuring that Malema does face justice, is in regards to that firearms charge, which is deeply ironic because during the Kill the Boer court case, which I attended, well, there's a lot of disturbing stuff came out in that court case. One of them being there was a farmer that lost his wife in a farm attack, and he was paralyzed in the attack, and he told his story there on the witness stand. And then when the one advocate asked Julius Malema, were you moved by that story? And will those types of stories convince you to stop singing Kill the Boer? He said, no, it will not stop me. And I was not moved. And then he repeats, I was not moved 5 times. And then also in that court case, he was asked, is Kill the Boer just a metaphor? And he says, yes, it's just a metaphor. And then the advocate asks him, all right, can you pledge under oath that you will never call for the slaughtering of white people? And then Malema's like, no, I can't make that pledge.
So who are the EFF? Can you give us some? I mean, obviously they look like race communists, basically.
Well, their official label for themselves is Marxist-Leninist. So that's their official label. They are, so in South Africa, the top 4 parties, if you want to vote for one of the 4 largest parties in South Africa, you've got your options are center left, left wing, far left, and far left. That's your options. So to all these people saying, if we give the left everything they want, we win. And no, you just end up in a country where you choose between 4 parties of different flavors of left-wing ideology. But anyway, what I wanted to mention before I forget, that one ironic quote from that Kill the Boer case was when Julius Malema said, of course, this chant is not meant literally. If we meant it literally, we would be standing on stage shooting real guns in the air while we chanted, not just with our fingers. And then he was convicted and found guilty of shooting a real firearm on stage.
Right. So, so the EFF is a South African communist and black nationalist political party. So if I could ask, what's the attitude of the ANC to the EFF? Do they regard them as dangerous? Do they regard them as useful? Are they street muscle? Would it be in the interest of the ANC?
It's exactly the same dynamic as you see in countries like the UK and the United States, where the leftists are they share an ideology with the far left, but the far left is just, they want things to happen too fast and too drastically, and that's where they differ. It's just about the speed, not about the location.
Right. Or
the destination, rather.
So everyone wants the communism. It's just a dispute on how fast to get there is what you're basically saying.
I mean, that's why the EFF broke away from the ANC. They said that the ANC had betrayed the Freedom Charter.
Oh, I see.
The same Freedom Charter that Mamdani believes in and sees as a key inspiration. So in a religious sense, they went through a little bit of a reformation where they said that the ANC had lost their way and they're the true Freedom Charter adherents.
So it's like the Fabians versus the communists, where the Fabians are like, oh, look, we're going to get to the revolution, guys, right? We're softly, catchy monkey.
And then the communists are like, no, we want it now.
The communists are like, we don't believe you anymore. This is taking too long. We need a revolution like right now.
I don't want 2 marshmallows. I want my 1 marshmallow now.
That's the low versus high time preference outcome for communism.
Yeah, but ideologically they are indistinguishable. It's literally just a debate over means and also time frame.
Well, I'm sure they're going to get everything that everything they want and deserve. It is weird to see communism sort of make a comeback in this sort of softer, sort of more slowly enshittified version, as though sort of the one lesson that the communists took from the early 20th century is that, like, we can still have a hecking wholesome Chungus communism. We've just got to do it like slowly so as not to startle the people that we are eventually going to take everyone's property from.
Right. And in the South African context, it really is just a debate between different left-wing parties debating on how fast we get to the utopia and how fast we need to be rowing across the ocean of blood.
Oof. Anyway, we're at an hour. So thank you very much, Ernst. I really appreciate it. That was a great talk. Do you have anything that you would like to plug? I know you're Conscious Caracal on Twitter. Give him a follow. He writes some good stuff. You can find Afriforum at, hang on, let me just find the at afriforum.co.za. Link will be in the description. Anything else you'd like to promote?
And then there's just my YouTube channel where I talk to interesting guests both from South Africa and abroad, but every time about a topic that is relevant not just to South Africa but also to the wider Western civilization. So that's my challenge with my YouTube channel. Is every conversation and discussion I have there, I try to straddle this line between this conversation has to be firstly relevant, has to still be relevant in 5 or 10 years. So I don't do current events analysis, but it also has to be relevant to either an American or a Brit or a South African listening. It can't just be niche content for a specific part of the world. It has to be content that is relevant to both South Africa and to Afrikaners and to the Western world. And that's what I try there on my YouTube channel. But yeah, that's where people can go watch me there. And if they want to support the state-proof solutions that Afriforum are pioneering, if they want to invest in the organization that's running the experiment on the antidote to South Africanization, so that those Western countries don't have to make the same mistakes as us or learn from our successes, they can donate to Afriforum by going to Friends of Afriforum to become an international friend and supporter of the organization. But I mean, that's kind of the bright side of it all that I want to end on, is the fact that, yes, unfortunately, it seems like many Western countries are on an irreversible path of South Africanization. But the good news is the antidote to South Africanization is already being pioneered at ground zero in South Africa. So just stay tuned.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your YouTube channel now. I didn't realize that you had a YouTube channel. I see you did an interview with Callum from Britannica. Yeah, check it out. Thank you so much again for coming along, Ernst. I hope that we will talk again.
All right. Cheers. Have a good one. God bless.